Okay, welcome back to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Jonathan Fortin. And he has written the book Lily. Okay, I see, I told you I was going to screw it up.
Lilitu, Bloody
Thank
Caleb.
you. Yeah, let you pronounce it. Lilitu, Bloody Caleb, which is a new book coming out from Crystal Lake, and we're going to let him introduce himself and pronounce his book much better than I did. So take it away.
It's okay. Um, hi, I'm Jonathan Fortin. I predominantly write gothic horror and dark fantasy, and in the case of my Lilitu series, a combination of both. And this is my cat Mia, for those of us who are wondering. And essentially, yeah. So it's a dark fantasy gothic horror series set in Victorian England, but a version of Victorian England that's been taken over by demons, specifically succubi and incubi and vampires, and uses that to explore, like gender roles, class and gender power dynamics, and all that stuff. So,
Okay,
and so this
so
is the oh, sorry. This is the first book in the series, Lilitu Memoirs of a Succubus. Lilitu Bloody Caleb. I don't quite have the paperbacks for that yet, but they are coming out October 3rd, and so I'll be able to hold them up in a video shortly.
okay, so tell us a little bit about Bloody Caleb. What's the book about?
For sure. So, Bloody Caleb is again, it's the second book in the series, but it's something that new readers can jump on board to read as well, because it's meant to be as accessible to them as possible. And basically, it follows the story of a murdered man, Caleb, who then goes into hell and is trying to escape from hell in order to get revenge on his killer. But along the way, finds out that in order to do so, he has to become a demon himself. And so it's sort of like I like to describe it as Dante's Inferno meets the Count of Monte Cristo. So Edmond Dante's Inferno, if you would.
Okay, so what were some of your inspirations for this book and for the series?
Yeah. So obviously that's a two-pronged question, but when I first was planning out and writing the first drafts for Lilitu, there weren't a lot of succubus and incubus books at the time. That and just in general, there weren't too many. And the ones that I read, I didn't feel. I personally wasn't as didn't feel like it was capturing kind of the amount of potential depth that these creatures could offer. Like, vampire books are a dime a dozen, werewolf books are a dime a dozen, but people weren't seeming to really delve into succubi and incubi. Like, incubi as characters are very rare, and succubi, usually when they show up, they're usually just these, femme fatale seductresses, and often like this, reinforcing, negative stereotypes about how women who have, some control over their sexuality are automatically always evil. And obviously, that's not a trope that I particularly feel is the most up to date when it comes to current views on gender. And I also was thinking about things like, okay, so if you have succubi are supposed to be beautiful, but what does that mean if you're looking at it from a body positive standpoint? They're supposed to enter dreams, but how does that manifest? And obviously, you have some interpretations being that it's the same spirit; it just shapeshifts into whatever your ideal partner might be. Now, I didn't actually end up taking the approach that it's just a shape-shifting creature for most succubi and incubi, just because that got away from what I wanted to actually do with the series. But in Bloody Caleb, there is a sort of a character where it explores that a bit. So, but more on that later. So I essentially decided to put it in Victorian England because A, it would mean you could have a lot of fantastic Gothic aesthetics, but also B, then you could have a character who grows up in this very repressed Victorian setting, full of very rigid gender norms and very conservative views on sexuality, and then becomes a succubus and then has to unpack all that. And in the case of Marina Blackwood, the protagonist of Memoirs of a Succubus, for her, it's something that she ends up finding empowerment in. Now, with Bloody Caleb, I ended up wanting to reverse that and make it a sort of mirror of the first book. So, the first book is a lot of what it does is explores, the horrors of misogyny, and in Bloody Caleb, it's more about the horrors of toxic masculinity. And so they do have a lot of there are some similarities in terms of both characters deal with a lot of things like body dysmorphia and sexual trauma and what have you, and and but it's like the direction ends up being different. It's sort of an inversion, because while Morena finds empowerment, when Caleb ends up becoming a demon, for him it ends up being more of a corruption arc, more of a story of just increasingly it's just downward spiral, as revenge stories tend to be. Um, Another factor is that originally, book 2 for the series was going to be a direct sequel to book 1, and we were going to meet Caleb as an antagonist, and then slowly, unravel his backstory. Um, but then the more that I developed it, the more I realized it kind of had to be its own book. And when I was pitching the series layout to Joe, I was like, okay, so like, hey, do you want more Lilitu books? Because this was always supposed to be a series, like the first one does have like a self-contained enough ending, but but I feel like there's consequences to what happened. And he wanted me to write a novella that we could give away for free. So I was originally thinking that Bloody Caleb was going to be that, but so I wrote it as a novella first, and I gave it to my writing group, and we critiqued it, and the conclusion that we all came to was that it needed to actually be a novel. And the more I thought about the themes and both how it connected to the larger series, but also how it could be a mirror or an inversion of the first book, the more it became clear, yeah, this does have to be a novel. So I expanded it into a full novel, and I think it's much better off for that. And so it became book 2 in the series. And instead, for the novella, I wrote a separate kind of side novel called Saint Killer, a Lilitu novel. It's a short novel because it ended up being 45,000 words, which, I thought it was a novella length, but it's basically a short novel. And so that is a free ebook that people can get as well if they're interested in the series, but don't want to have to, spend any money, and they just want to check out what the series is all about. And I'm actually really proud of that one as well, because it's just like a pure Gothic horror story. This is like a lot of different genres mixed together, but Saint Killer is more pure Gothic horror. But Bloody Caleb is again like it's like a lot of inspiration there. There's some aspects of Dante's Inferno. There's some aspects of Old Boy. I'm a big fan of the film Old Boy, and obviously all the Gothic aesthetics that you can, but in a hell setting. So Bosch is in there. It's a lot of stuff.
Well, it all sounds very cool. So
Thank you. Sorry for
you talked a little bit about this already, but what did you want to explore with Bloody Caleb that you didn't explore with the first novel?
Yeah, so Bloody Caleb does a lot to seed a lot of important stuff later on in the series that Morena doesn't have the opportunity to do in her story, because so much of Morena's story is set in London and on Earth specifically, but the Lilitu cosmos is much larger than that. And so with Bloody Caleb, we see a lot more of hell, and he goes on much more of an actual physical journey. Obviously, he spends a lot of time in London as well, because there's various setup things. But this seeds a lot of kind of the larger forces at work. So in book 1, one of the primary characters is an incubus named Salem Soterios. And we know that he's working for a group called the Church of Black Heaven, but we don't really see too much of them. And in book 2, in Bloody Caleb, we actually see them in much more detail, and we find out who's their boss, the creepy Emperor Riven, who is just ugh. So so we there's that gets seeded, and again, like there's certain other ideas that are very important that expand on things like it's set up in the first book that, when you become a succubus or incubus, essentially you take succubus milk, and then you take the form of whatever you feel would be your most beautiful self. Now, after that, you can still feel like, oh God, I wish I'd somehow gotten even hotter, because if you're if you're around a bunch of other, succubi and incubi, and they're all super hot, then you're still going to be dealing with some dysmorphia potentially. You're still going to be comparing yourself to these other people, because that's just human nature. You can't get away from that. And in the first book, we see how this can translate into different body types, because people who grow up in different cultures, grow up thinking, oh, this is what's attractive, and so that was something I want to draw attention to, where, we're living in this modern era, which is this very rigid idea about, how people are supposed to look. But in different periods of time, different cultures, that was a lot more diverse. There were times where, it was more attractive for, women to be larger, or it was more attractive for men to wear makeup and powdered wigs and that sort of thing. And yeah, you just left. and and I wanted to, in the nature of exploring this, I also felt that it was important to show that, if you're someone who's secretly trans, for example, then taking succubus milk will reflect that, and how this society explored that. And additionally, I mentioned before there's a shape changing succubus character, shape changing Lilitu character, not necessarily succubus, not necessarily incubus. And I wanted to really delve a lot into the psychology of that, because for me, it's not just someone's body that draws us to them. Like a lot of times we can be attracted to personality. So, if you were someone with this particular, rare Lilitu bloodline, where you would change shape to fit the tastes of whatever person you're targeting, wouldn't that also mean that your personality would shift as well, not just your body? And in order to stop this from having, like, the plot where, like, everyone's a shape changer, and so nothing has any stakes because that person wasn't actually that person, that was a clone, or something like that, I decided to make it be that this is just one particular character, and it's a very rare bloodline. Most of the time people don't survive taking it. And because of that, it makes their power be something that is very, very valuable to the powers that be. So that's something that they have some control over. And because of this, there's so many different just fucked up ways that this character could be manipulated. So there's a lot of things that, like, taking some of the core principles of the books that I'm just like expanding on them and giving more depth to them. And in the process, having a lot more complicated things to say about gender, and getting away from the kind of more rigid gender binary that we see most of in this book, which also makes sense because, so much of Caleb's journey is about, toxic masculinity, and him being kind of like, oh, I have to do this thing because it's my role as a man. And then, in the process, encountering character after character who just throws all this into question. In the second half especially. So a lot, both thematically and in terms of seeding stuff for book 3.
Well, that leads nicely into the next question is, what about the character of Caleb? What is his character arc in the book?
So Caleb's character arc is, well, it's a corruption arc. He starts off the book as a vagrant violinist. He had a violin shop he lived in with his father, but after witnessing his father summon a succubus who then murders him and then causes a fire to take their shop, he ends up on the streets and spends the next 10 years of his life there while trying to convince himself, oh, that didn't really happen, did it? I must have just been nuts, because it just sounds so unreal. And but then he reunites with an old friend of his who wants to recruit him into it's a cult, into a cult where he thinks it's like, okay, so it's probably just a place where a bunch of rich old men are trying to get away from their wives. It's gonna be fine. They're totally not actually satanic or anything, and things don't go that well. So. After he's murdered, he very much wants revenge. But another factor of this is the person who killed him, he's in love with that man's wife and really wants to go and save her because this guy's abusive. And he's like worried that like, okay, if he just hits her hard enough, then she'll end up in hell too. She'll end up just suffering and being tortured by demons all day like I am. I don't want that. So he feels this pressure and this time limit to get back to Earth as quickly as possible. And of course, it doesn't actually end up taking as quickly as possible. It ends up taking him fucking years to get back. But sorry, spoiler, but but in the process, so much of it is like he's forced to make moral compromise after moral compromise in service of this goal that he's dedicated himself to. And to the point where like he's unrecognizable as a person, and all because he thought that this was what he was supposed to do. So he's very much a tragic character, and he doesn't always do the wrong thing, but the things that he does do wrong are always like the really big bad wrong thing that he really shouldn't have done. So it's like you almost got my sympathy for a second there.
Yeah, well, that makes the best books when the characters do the really bad things. So this book is about demons and it's Victorian Gothic. So what about that genre appeals to you for writing?
Well, I've always been drawn to the aesthetics of the Gothic, for one thing. I mean, shocker. I saw Sleepy Hollow in middle school, the Tim Burton one, and I was forever changed. But also, I just as far as demons are concerned, I feel like there's a lot of, again, I feel like there's untapped territory there. I feel like there's a lot of things to explore in regards to them as being a sort of shadow of humanity, and something that is I feel like they take vampires, for example, epitomize so much of like this forbidden sex, but also death. Where it's like they're sexy, but they're also going to kill you. And I feel like demons, and especially succubi and incubi, really epitomize that even harder. And I love then the aesthetics in terms of things like their wings and I just feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff there. But I think another factor here is that I personally am autistic, and I grew up very miserable, very hypersensitive, and I think that one of the things that people don't realize about a lot of goths that a lot of goths are also neurodivergent. A lot of the people that make Gothic music are neurodivergent in some way, and that doesn't always necessarily mean autistic. It could mean bipolar. It could be borderliner. It could be schizophrenic. It could be narcissistic. And most people in the goth scene are like one of those, in my experience, or at the very least, just depressed and traumatized. And I just remember this very funny, there were people would recognize this the similarities between autistic people and vampires, where it's like, okay, we have to be explicitly invited to everything, because we won't. If you just say, hey, I'm having a party this weekend, we're going to be like, cool. You have to actually say, do you want to come? Because otherwise we're going to think that we're not invited. And then there was also like this thing where it's like, oh, autistic people are like cats because they only like to be touched certain times in certain ways, and and that sort of thing. And I'm like, so basically vampires are also like cats, and cats are like autistic people, and autistic people are also like vampires. So it's like, it's the same thing. I don't know. So there's just, it's hard to say, but Suffice to say, as an autistic person who's had a very dark outlook in life, um, it's and has a very it's I've always been drawn to Gothic aesthetics. I've always been drawn to the Victorian era, and to a certain extent, I've always been drawn to demons because they too are demonized. What do you people say like, oh, autism's on the rise? Well, yeah, because in the olden days when they saw an autistic person, they said they were possessed by a demon and just murdered them.
Yeah,
I literally know other people on the spectrum for whom they grew up in right wing areas, and as because they were autistic, the religious people tried to perform exorcisms on them just for being a weird kid. So I think in my case, there is a certain sort of kinship in the figures of demons from a fictional standpoint. I don't actually believe in them in real life, but so I realize that may be controversial for some people, but from a fictional standpoint, there is some sense of kinship there, just like with vampires. It's because I get demonized too.
yeah. I mean, I can see that. I mean, it's like there's a certain outcast mentality with a lot of people that have separated people with autism and other people with disabilities. And it's past ages, it's been a lot worse because they were thrown in asylums and, as you said, killed and other things. And yeah,
No.
so it's like, and
and
people
and now
say
they
that,
want to put us in wellness farms.
yeah, I mean, people say there's a rise in autism, but there isn't a rise in autism. There's a rise in diagnosing autism.
Exactly. Exactly. Uh,
People are no longer misdiagnosing people with autism instead of actually a rise in the disease. It's
Seriously.
ridiculous.
And so many
Yeah.
people, especially people who are women, people who are people of color, are finally getting starting to either realize that they're on the spectrum, or I don't actually know how much they're actually getting diagnosed more. I think some of them are, but it's like basically back in the 90s, only white men were diagnosed, even though that wasn't obviously it's not only white men who are on the spectrum, because whenever we looked on TV, the only examples we saw were white men. It wasn't and so people who are in other groups are starting to finally get some recognition. Hey, wait a second, autism isn't just a white guy thing, and so that's another factor there. There's a good book about that called Unmasking Autism, by Devin Price, I believe. It's kind of a hard read, but it's very good for anyone who thinks what if I'm on the spectrum? I might be.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're seeing it more and more that adults are getting diagnosed as some sort of neurodivergent. You see
Yeah,
a lot of ADHD diagnosis in adulthood as opposed to. So, I mean, they've had this their entire life. They're just getting their diagnosis now.
exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's all very complex, and people just they don't want to be expend their energy to explore the complexity of it, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's easier to just demonize an entire group of people and just not recognize their basic fundamental humanity, um, especially if it's this person doesn't fit, and you base your entire view on goodness on whether this person fits into these extremely rigid social norms, which are often extremely harmful to everyone, not just autistic people.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so we want to pull back a little bit from the politics there because we are trying to talk about the
oh
book.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we don't want to get in trouble with YouTube or anything. Who
Yeah,
knows?
get flame
So,
warped on the comments. Sorry.
how deep down the research rabbit hole did you dive for writing these books as far as the history of Victorian England?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously you have to do a lot because anytime that you do something, you'll have to figure out. Oh, so especially this specific year that it's in, because the Victorian era was such a period of such rapid change that the specific year that you're doing can make a huge difference in regards to um, what's been invented yet and what's been normalized yet. So it's like, okay, have chainsaws been invented yet? Yes, apparently for childbirth, or it's a fucking horrible time.
Okay,
Am I
yeah.
allowed to swear? I apologize. You can bleep that out.
Yeah, I think that's a horror book in itself, chainsaws being invented for childbirth, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And in the case, one thing that we see in the first chapter, Bloody Caleb, is he goes to a homeless shelter where all you just lie down in a coffin all day, like you're already dead, because that's what they did. They had homeless shelters for coffins, and that's if you were had enough to afford a coffin, because if you really had no money, then you could do the penny sit up, where you would just sit on a bench and you were not allowed to fall asleep. And if they saw you falling asleep, they would throw you out of there. And then there was like a rope that people would be nodding off on. So it's like you got the sit up, you got the rope that you can just be like leaning against, or you can get a coffin. Because everything about Victorian England is just pure horror. So
Oh, yeah.
there's a lot of research in regards to that stuff, but then also the things like when I was doing the first book, I had to make sure that the timeline was accurate, because one of the villains in the series is Queen Isabel, who's a succubus, who is a fictional daughter of Queen Victoria, because I didn't want to besmirch the reputation of any of Queen Victoria's actual children, and so I'm like, okay, let me figure out. I'll just give her a new one. And
Yeah, the secret child we don't talk about.
well, they don't talk about her because she
Yeah.
maimed animals as a kid, So it's like, um, and so she ends up being. They want to have demons want a figurehead, basically, and so she is a succubus queen who then has a right to the throne as far as they're concerned. And so I had to make sure that she was, that I put it in such a place that year where she could have been born, but then would have been the right age, and so there's a lot of like finagling that, and then kind of like where all this was going on with like, oh, where at this point in time, where was it with, Kellogg and all his weird repression that he was doing for, the experiments of female hysteria and that sort of thing. So I was like, ooh.
Yeah, that's another horror story too, Kellogg, but anyway. So what's your favorite scene in the book?
um, in Bloody Caleb, I would say my favorite scene is probably, well, I can't really talk about it. I think it ends on a very strong note. I think the second to the last chapter, where a lot of things come to a head, is very strong and upsetting in a good way. But I would say a scene that I can talk about that I'm really proud of is about midway through the book. Caleb is he's encountered a group of demon soldiers that he's trying to get in good with, and they end up, for various reasons, giving him an opportunity to march with them on a battle to sort of prove his worth. And this battle is happening over a part of hell where there's been a bunch of people who have been sewn together as sort of a blanket over the dirt or ash or whatever, and so it's called the Patchwork Sea, because one of the other demons we meet earlier in the book is this woman who's all about sewing people in such a way, and their eyes and mouths have been sewed shut, their fingers have been sewed to like flippers, and they're all sewed against each other, but they're still they're mortal souls in hell, so they're still experiencing this, and people are like either marching over them in full suits of armor or riding on top of them and on these horses, and some of them, like, their mouths have come out and they're just like, oh, I'm gonna mess you up, I'm gonna get out of here, just really just angrily shouting at whoever is up there, and then they end up meeting the other line, which ends up, the enemy line, which is people that have been turned into these more like ghouls or zombies, and so he's like realizing that all the troops around him are starting to like vomit up blood as they become infected, and then rising up as ghouls, and because of this person who's transforming all of them. And so it's just a very paranoid, intense scene with like all sorts of different weird dark horror imagery happening all at once.
Oh, sounds very cool. So, did you find anything challenging about writing your book? Did a scene or a character give you any trouble?
I would say the biggest challenge with Bloody Caleb was finding the right balance between, trying to not be too gratuitous or excessive, while still having a realistic depiction of how bad hell would be. If I'm trying to show how bad a literal hell would be, then I can't pull any punches. But on the other hand, it's like there's some things that realistically would probably be the case, but I don't want to show that. So I'm like, I don't want to have this book be like just full of sexual assault, because that would not be fun. I don't like that. And I don't, I avoided like a lot of like poop stuff. Like I'm sure that like hell would have a lot more poop stuff. I just don't want to write about poop stuff. So it's still really, it's a really dark book though. It's very bleak. It's very violent. There is sexual violence in it. Just, I try to be tasteful about it. So finding that, that kind of, that middle ground where it's just not so uncomfortable to read that no one can read it. I'm not trying to write the Black Farm here. I know that there's some people who really like that stuff, but I'm not a splatterpunk author, and I know that a lot of people who connected with the first book, especially, did so because they felt they connected with the way that it handled its issues. And I don't want to be like, all right, we're just going full on gore porn now. Woohoo! So, but yeah, other than that, I would say this one came out really easily. And it's more book 3, which has been the challenging one, because there's so much going on in that one. I actually had to split book 3 into 2 books. So there's book 3 and there's book 4 now, and then the book 4 is the last one, and they're both really long. I'm editing book 3 now, and it's been hard.
Yeah, the book lengths will do what they will do, and that's the point.
Yeah.
I started out writing a short story that ended into a trilogy, so yeah, I feel you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, why did you decide to write in the horror genre? What's the appeal for you?
Well, again, being autistic, I'm someone who's very anxious a lot of the time, and I found that when I was a kid, I was terrified by everything. I didn't actually like horror movies when I was a kid, but I did read Goosebumps books, which is probably a sign that I was going to get into it eventually. But I found that, I ended up being someone who found that, in order to reduce my anxiety, writing about it was helpful. Finding some sort of creative way of taking control of it was always going to be something that I was just going to have to do in order to manage it. And because otherwise, if it's like how comedians are always very depressed and often suicidal. A lot of horror creators I find are people who are very anxious, or have a lot of fear that they don't have other ways of doing, don't have other way of directing it. Now, I'm not saying that's always the truth for all of them, but I find that it has been true for many of my favorite horror creators, and I would watch interviews with them or listen to, read or listen to interviews with them, and they would be like, yeah, I actually identify with this character in this book because, because this is the character who's anxious and terrified all the time, and that's why I create this stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I do the same thing.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of other authors as well, and also it's a good conduit for getting out anger issues as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So, is there a facet of writing fiction that's tricky for you in general?
The marketing.
Yeah,
And
that's a universal one too.
querying. I was trying to query a different manuscript. Uh, and we'll have to go back into those trenches at some point with another book when I'm done with the Lilitu series. As far as the writing craft is concerned, I often find I will often have like images in my head that are sometimes hard to communicate to the reader, especially like if I have some big complex action set piece in my head. It works very differently than it would than if you were doing a movie, because you have to communicate things like the geography to a reader. So say that you're having a big complex chase scene through a house. The reader should have some awareness of that house's general geography and layout for that action sequence to make sense. And now imagine taking that same principle and then putting it in big epic sci-fi fantasy settings. And sometimes you have to end up simplifying it in your head, just because the thing that you're imagining, the reader's never going to be able to grasp without, or you're not going to be able to communicate it in a way that the reader will grasp, especially if they're not paying extremely close attention, like drawing their own little like map or whatever. It's I often just have to be like, okay, how do I write this in a way that that will actually communicate to the reader what I'm thinking? Is something that I sometimes struggle with. And then having
Yeah.
it not be like 10 pages of description. We're not writing Tolkien here.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I even choreograph scenes out because I have to know how the character's moving and, how much distance they're covering, how fast, and things like that. Yeah. Yeah, it can get complicated. All right, I get that.
You know.
So, what's your favorite aspect of being a writer?
um, I would say the catharsis of completing something that you feel proud of. Um, Connecting with other writers is always very fun, especially I mean, that can come with an asterisk, because sometimes if you're having a hard time finding your crowd, that can be tough. But I know that like there were so many conventions where I would kind of struggle to like find my people. And then I started going to StokerCon, and it was kind of like, oh, everyone else here is weird too. I like it here. um, so there's that. But also, I just love plotting. I'm a plot guy. I love developing plots. So,
Yeah, that is fun. So, what are some of your favorite books and your favorite authors?
so this is a somewhat.
Yeah, this is the controversial question that a lot
Well,
of.
it would have been easier if you'd asked me before 2020, because so many of my favorite authors have since turned out to be not great people.
Yeah, I can get you on that one. I know at least one of my favorite authors turned out to be a not great person. We
Yeah. So,
won't mention his name.
Raleigh. Sorry. Um, totally just was not coughing any authors' names of any particular people then. But there's still a lot of really good stuff out there that I think I can talk about. But I really love China Mayville's Baz Lag series, because that's produced Street Station and the Scar. They're just so weird. I love actually it was like, let me look at my list. I love Holly Black. I actually studied under her at Clarion back in 2012, and that was fantastic because I've been a fan of her books since high school, and so getting to study under her was really cool. And I love Clive Barker's Books of Blood. I love bizarro fiction from Carlton Young III, like Satan Burger and Biomelt and Quicksand House. Um, I love Joe Hill's NOS 482. I love Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind. Um, and I really love Robert R. McCammon's The Wolf's Hour, because it's basically James Bond as a werewolf fighting Nazis in World War II, and there's nothing about that sentence I don't love. The book's ridiculous. Um, as far as Joe Hill's concerned, I'm really looking forward to his new book, King Sorrow, and October is actually a very exciting month, not just for this, but because King Sorrow comes out, but is also Jay Kristoff's Third Empire, the Vampire book comes out as well. And I'm really excited to read that because that series is so fun. It like rips off all my favorite things, but then like combines them into something so well. Because it's like, okay, well, you got the characters from The Witcher, and you get the frame from like Name of the Wind or Interview with the Vampire, and then you get like, aesthetics from like Castlevania, and then, steal the scene from Salem's Lot. It rips off so many things, but does so in a really fun way. So I really enjoy that series.
Yeah, they're all good books. So, what are some of the other stories or books that you've written?
So right now, the only novel series that I have out is the Lilitu series. Obviously, Saint Killer is something that's out as well, but that's like a optional side novel. But it's free, so I hope people check it out. I did publish some short fiction as well. Like with horaddicts.net, there's a short story ebook called Requiem in Frost, which is a lot of fun. It's about a girl in Norway who moves into a haunted house, and it's haunted specifically by the ghost of a murdered black metal musician. And so it's like at night they're waking up to that sort of thing. And so she ends up befriending the ghost and trying to find his killer. That's a fun one. And there was one that I don't think is there's one that is on what was it? Dark Recesses Press, and it's a short story about a cat, and it's from the POV of a cat as the cat is like battling various, this night demon that's haunting the cat's owner, and the cat's like, of course, views its owner as their pet. And so it's basically exploring the idea that when cats get zoomies at night, they're actually battling eldritch abominations that we can't see but are potentially impacting us. So that one was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would explain a lot about cats too. Will say.
Yeah.
So what's your next project? What can readers expect from you in the future?
So I got a couple buns in the oven. One is obviously Lilitu Book 3, Across the River Styx, where characters from both Memoirs of Succubus and Bloody Caleb and Saint Killer will all converge. And it's like the big epic Empire Strikes Back of the series. And sorry, my eyes itchy. Then of course I'm working on book 4. I haven't started book 4. It's all plotted out. Book 3 I'm in the process of revising after having workshopped it, and so it's going to take a bit more time. There's a couple unrelated projects that I have. There is one finished novel that I have that I was trying to get agents for, which is sort of cosmic horror fantasy about a future where we're ruled by cosmic abominations, and everyone's been mutated and everyone has trauma, and I adore it, but I think it was considered a little too long, and agents were a little shy about that. It's just a little weird because they're like, how do I market this to Book Talk? And so that's one thing. I have one book that I'm, it's a little bit on the back burner now because I'm really focused on the Lilitu series, but I have I've revised it several times. I have several revised drafts of it where it's a horror comedy about amateur demon slayers in San Francisco taking on demon tech bros, but it's hard because they can't afford the rent because it's San Francisco. And so a lot of the humor is things like, oh my God, there's a demon in the mission. All right, we'll try to find it. There's nowhere to park. Okay, we'll just get out and we'll try to take it out. And by the time that you found parking, which you had to pay like $40 for a flat fee for, the demon's already moved on somewhere else, and so it's a lot of that sort of very dry millennial, everything is terrible type humor. And and then I also have a Gothic romantasy that I'm sort of working on for fun in the background, because sometimes Lilitu is just a little too depressing, and sometimes you just want something that's just a little more fun. And in the planning stages, I have some autism centric thrillers where it's thrillers or horror books where the main characters are autistic. And I got two of those. One of them I wrote the first draft of several years ago, but I wasn't too happy with it. And then Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus came out, and it was basically the same plot. And I was like, God damn it! much love to Dr. Tingle. He's fantastic. And I'm like, that's better than I could do. Okay, let me go back to the drawing board for this one. So a lot of things going on, because that's how I do it.
Yeah, as someone who has currently 12 works in progress, probably more. I've stopped counting. I understand that. So yeah. Okay, and I think we'll wrap the interview up here. I'd like to thank you for being a guest today. It was a very great pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise, thank you so much, Anita. Appreciate it.
Okay, and that's it for this episode. And bye for now, everybody.